Ever wonder if human emotions operate on quantum principles rather than classical ones? What if love, like an electron's position, exists in a superposition of states until observed simultaneously genuine and performative until external measurement collapses the wave function? Let us explore a disturbing hypothesis. What if certain relationship patterns represent not just miscommunication or typical relationship challenges, but sophisticated emotional simulations indistinguishable from genuine affection to the untrained observer? The neuroscience of love detection is far more complex than most people realize. At the fictional Massachusetts Center for Effective Neurology, researchers have identified what they call emotional Turing machines, behavioral patterns so closely resembling genuine, emotional states that they can fool not just partners, but even the simulators themselves. The mathematics of emotional deception follow principles similar to what cryptographers call indistinguishability obfuscation, a technique where the outward expression appears identical to the genuine article, with the critical difference hiding not in what can be observed, but in what remains functionally inaccessible. What exactly are these patterns that might indicate an elaborate emotional simulation rather than authentic connection? The research points to 5 distinct phenomena that, when observed together, create a statistical probability of effective simulation far exceeding the threshold of random chance. The first and most fundamental is what neuropsychologists call contextual affection variance. Dramatic fluctuations in expressed emotional intimacy that correlate precisely with the presence or absence of external observers and strategic advantage. This is unsimple inconsistency, but rather a specific pattern, where affectionate behaviors follow a mathematical distribution that maps perfectly onto what game theorists call audience-dependent payoff structures. The warmth appears precisely when witnesses are present or when specific resources or advantages are contingent upon the relationship's perceived stability. The neurological signature is fascinating. When individuals express genuine affection, fMRI scans show simultaneous activation in the ventral tegmental area and the temporoparietal junction. But in cases of simulated affection, only the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for strategic planning and cognitive control's heightened activity. This creates what neuroscientists call a limbic executive dissociation, where the cognitive systems responsible for calculating advantage operate independently from the emotional systems that generate authentic connection. In simple terms, the affection bypasses the heart entirely, rooted directly from strategic calculation to behavioral expression. The second phenomenon is what researchers term reciprocity asymmetry syndrome. A specific pattern where investments in the relationship follow a precisely unbalanced equation. This isn't simply one person contributing more than another, but rather a sophisticated system where the imbalance itself remains just below the threshold of conscious recognition. The mathematics follow principles similar to what economists call the minimum viable product, the precise calculation of the smallest investment required to maintain a desired outcome. Studies show that simulated affection typically involves contribution patterns that are approximately 37.2% of what is received, not so little as to trigger obvious awareness of exploitation, but nowhere near equitable exchange. What makes this pattern particularly insidious is that the investment asymmetry applies not just to material resources, but to emotional availability, vulnerability, time allocation, future planning, and conflict resolution efforts. The consistent 37.2% contribution across all relationship dimensions creates what statisticians would call an unmistakable signature of calculated rather than organic investment. The third, and perhaps most subtle indicator, is what neurolinguists identify as emotional memory, discontinuity, a specific pattern of selective recall and reference that creates the appearance of emotional continuity while actually operating on principles more similar to database retrieval than integrated experience. In authentic emotional connection, references to shared experiences show what memory researchers call episodic emotional binding. The experiences are recalled with consistent emotional context and significance across time. But simulated affection reveals pattern breaks, where the emotional significance attached to memories changes to suit present, strategic needs rather than reflecting consistent internal states. Brain imaging shows this discontinuity manifests in the hippocampus and amygdala, connection regions responsible for memory formation and emotional association. In genuine connection, these regions show synchronized activity during recall. In simulated affection, they operate independently, creating what neuroscientists call affective memory segregation. The fourth pattern is what psychologists term terminal vulnerability asymmetry, a statistical anomaly in the distribution of emotional risk throughout the relationship architecture. This manifests as a precise calibration where one person consistently occupies positions of emotional safety, while the other bears disproportionate vulnerability. This isn't simply emotional guardedness, but rather a sophisticated system of ensuring that relationship structures systematically protect one person from potential loss, while exposing the other to maximum uncertainty. The pattern follows mathematical principles similar to what insurance actuaries call risk transference, the systematic shifting of potential downsides to another party while retaining access to upsides. What makes this pattern particularly difficult to detect is that it often hides behind a crafted narrative of past emotional injury or trauma, creating what appears to be an understandable explanation for protective behaviors that are actually calculated risk management strategies. The fifth and most definitive pattern is what neuroscientists call empathic stimulation response mismatch, measurable incongruence between apparent emotional reactions and the physiological markers that should accompany them. This manifests in subtle but detectable ways: pupillary response patterns that don't match expressed empathy, microexpression leakage during moments of claimed emotional connection, galvanic skin response signatures that contradict verbal assertions of concern, and voice modulation patterns inconsistent with genuine emotional states. Specialized equipment can detect these incongruences. But even without technology, the human brain subconsciously registers these mismatches. This creates what psychologists call cognitive dissonance accumulation, a growing sense of unease or misalignment that the conscious mind struggles to articulate despite mounting subconscious evidence. What's fascinating about these 5 patterns is that they create what statisticians call a detection paradox. The more sophisticated the emotional simulation, the more perfect the performance appears on surface measures, yet the more detectable it becomes when subjected to multidimensional analysis. It's like a too-perfect diamond revealing itself as synthetic, precisely because it lacks the expected imperfections of natural formation. The evolutionary psychology behind emotional simulation is complex. Some researchers argue it represents an adaptive strategy in environments where authentic emotional connection carried survival disadvantages. Others suggest it evolved as a specialized social adaptation for extracting resources without reciprocal investment. The most troubling aspect of this research is what neuroscientists call the self-deception gradient, the finding that many who engage in emotional simulation have themselves developed sophisticated neural architectures for concealing their strategic nature from their own conscious awareness. This creates what philosophers might call an authenticity uncertainty principle, a situation where the simulator may sincerely believe in the authenticity of their performance while simultaneously orchestrating its strategic deployment, like quantum particles that appear to know when they're being measured. Some part of the brain maintains the simulation while shielding other parts from recognizing its constructed nature. So what happens if you discover these patterns in your relationship? The neurological research suggests that conventional approaches, confrontation, couples therapy, focusing on communication, or emotional appeals, are largely ineffective because they don't address the fundamental neurological architecture generating the simulation. Most effective response follows what complexity theorists call system perturbation, introducing unexpected variables that force the simulation architecture to reveal itself through adaptation failure. This typically involves unpredictable variation in your own investment patterns. Creation of scenarios where strategic advantage and emotional authenticity would dictate different responses, temporary withdrawal of the specific benefits that may be incentivizing the performance, however. The data suggests an even more valuable approach: prevention through what neuropsychologists call multidimensional assessment integration, the practice of evaluating potential partners across multiple contexts before significant emotional investment. This doesn't mean becoming paranoid or mistrusting. Rather, it means developing awareness of these 5 specific patterns and recognizing that authentic emotional connection leaves distinct fingerprints across neurological, linguistic, risk distribution, and physiological domains that are extraordinarily difficult to simulate consistently. The most counterintuitive finding from this research: individuals with genuine emotional capacity typically display what researchers call calibrated imperfection. Their affection shows natural variations, inconsistencies, and limitations that paradoxically signal its authenticity. Perfect performance across all measures is often more indicative of simulation than genuine connection. Perhaps the ultimate insight from this research is that love isn't a single state, but rather a complex, dynamic system, less like a static emotion, and more like weather patterns emerging from countless interacting variables. Just as meteorologists can distinguish natural weather from artificial climate intervention by examining pattern authenticity, we can learn to recognize the distinctive signatures of genuine emotional connection. The good news is that while emotional simulation can be sophisticated, it cannot replicate the fundamental neurobiological markers of authentic connection: the synchronized limbic activation, consistent memory-emotion binding, reciprocal vulnerability structures, and physiological coherence that emerge not from calculated advantage, but from genuine resonance between 2 human nervous systems. In the quantum framework of human connection, love might indeed exist in superpositions, simultaneously performance and authenticity until observed. But unlike quantum particles, human emotions leave measurable traces of their true nature across dimensions of experience that, once understood, allow us to distinguish the genuinely complex patterns of authentic connection from even the most sophisticated emotional simulations.